In the late 4th century, during the War of the Greek City-States, which lasts 27 years and during which time the Greek city-states basically destroy one another, there will be a power vacuum that's created. This is going to allow a king from Macedon in the north to swoop down and subjugate the Greek city-states. He's going to come in and pick them off one by one. And guess what? They're not going to help each other until it's too late. And the reason for that is the hostilities of war among themselves. The king of Macedon then will absorb the Greek world, and for 2 years he's going to rule it. He's not going to live longer to enjoy it, however, because Philip, that's his name, will be assassinated in 336 BCE. He's going to be succeeded, however, by a pretty important player, and that will be Alexander, his young son, who takes the throne at the age of 20. Alexander is going to rule for 13 years, and during that time, he is going to expand what we come to think of as the Greek world, taking it all the way to India. The image that I have on the screen on the left is a depiction of Alexander. By now, I think you know I'm talking about Alexander the Great. He was, back in the day, considered to be divine. And if you take a look at this, this is a coin. You're going to see right here a horn. And horns were considered symbols of masculinity, power, and strength, but they were also often considered images of a divine nature. And that's going to be true for that depiction there. So those who knew Alexander considered him not just a great general, but also a god. The map that we have on the right gives us a little bit of a sense of the expansion of Alexander's empire. Coming down from Macedon in the north, his daddy conquers the Greek world. Everything that is yellow is going to belong to Alexander the Great. And I think you can see that in many places it fills the red outlines, and in some cases it goes beyond them. The red outlines represent the borders of territory that was controlled by the Persians. So Alexander is conquering the great empire of the Persians, and he extends his boundaries well beyond that. So exactly what is significant about Alexander for us? Yes, he's a great general. He was brilliant on the battlefield. But for us in an art history course, or in a history course for that matter, the real reason that Alexander is important is that every place he went, everywhere he conquered, he took Greek culture with him, so that he expands the base of the Greek world and its teachings. Okay, how did that happen? Well, his father Philip got for Alexander the best teachers on the planet, and back in the time of Alexander, when he was growing up, those would have been Greeks. Alexander the Great had a private tutor, get ready, it was Aristotle. So he was taught by the best Greek minds. This also means he came to love and respect Greek culture. So every place that Alexander went, he would create a city, he would bring in Greek mathematicians, Greek teachers, Greek philosophers, Greek architects, and Greek artists in order to expand and promote the Greek world. It is said that Alexander carried with him a copy of the Iliad and slept with it under his pillow. That copy of the Iliad was annotated by Aristotle. In other words, it's the stories way back in the time of the Mycenaeans that fueled the imagination of Alexander the Great and gave him such a respect for the ancient Greek world. The image that we have lower left is a mosaic. It does depict the battle between Alexander and the great Persian king Darius. We're going to save that until it's figure 570, until we get to Rome, because it was excavated from Pompeii. So I think we need to see it in a Roman context. Because of the incredible political upheaval that occurred in the Greek world in the 4th century and afterwards, we are going to expect to see huge changes in art, and that in fact is true. The Hellenistic period officially begins with the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE. We count it as lingering in place until Augustus, who will become the first Roman emperor, actually officially takes the throne. So in this period of a few hundred years, Hellenistic art is going to be incredibly influential. It's also very, very easy to understand. First of all, it's often large. It's very theatrical. We're going to see that with an example. You are also going to see that in the video that I have for you on the altar of Zeus at Pergamon. It tends also to be cosmopolitan, often coming from the city-states that were founded as a result of Alexander's conquest. These city-states tended to be rich, to import people from outside, to fill the many jobs and vacancies that were present in these cities, or perhaps morphing into kingdoms with very rich and elaborate court society. So we're thinking of art that is complex, theatrical, large in scale, expensive, and cosmopolitan. It's also generally going to be more open. It's going to be definitely more emotional, often powerfully so, and transitory. Okay, by transitory, I mean that it's going to suggest movement and change, as opposed to classical art, which tends to seem much more permanent, remote, and depictions in the classical period seem to be somehow distant and portraying an unspecific time that can last forever. Hellenistic images are also going to be much less ideal. They're going to tell the truth a lot more, and they're going to be less remote than classical images. It's also become tradition to compare classicism, the classical 5th century BCE period, to the period of Hellenistic art because it makes it easier to understand both of them. The changes that occur in the Hellenistic period do reflect the social and the political changes. After Alexander the Great dies, after ruling for 13 years, there's going to be an increase in insecurity in the world because his great empire is going to split apart. And as that happens, the people living in it are not certain of their future. There's also going to be a greater alienation in big cities. I think you can know that from our experience in our own country, that people living in large cities think New York perhaps, or maybe think Philly. They don't know their neighbors as much as the folks who live in the little small towns or in the small comfy city states, which provide a greater sense of community and a greater sense of security. So we're talking about a different world, a different environment. There's also going to be greater emphasis on the individual as a result of this. Art is also going to be more humanized. It's going to be brought further into the realm of human beings, and it's going to display an intense range of emotions and also new subjects as we begin to see new types of people portrayed that the classical period would never have considered depicting. It is going to continue and accelerate the trends of the late classical period at the end of the 4th century after the War of the Greek City-States. So it's kind of an evolution and continuation. One thing I would like to point out and have you think about is that in this period the gods are brought down to earth more, and that has to suggest a little less confidence in them. Just think, your world is breaking down, it's disintegrating. If you are a Greek on mainland Greece, in fact, you've lost something very precious to you, and that's your independence and your liberty, because you're now under control of a king. This brings about a feeling of a lack of confidence in the gods to whom you had been previously devoted. I have two images, just a really clear, stark contrast. The face on the left, discus thrower from the classical period in the Greek world, 5th century BCE, and the face of the Laocoon, which is intensely emotional, and it is a Hellenistic piece. You have a video from Smart History that I would like you to look at to investigate the Laocoon for our purposes right now. Simply see that it represents almost the epitome, the top, going over the top, in fact, of emotional depictions compared to the discus thrower who is engaged in a physical action but shows no emotion and no strain on his face. This is 583 in our textbook, and it is the victory of Samothrace, or the winged victory as she's sometimes called. It is classic in terms of representing Hellenistic style, so I want you to know it for that. But I also want you very much to know this because some of you in your lifetime will visit Paris, and when you're in Paris you will see this work because it's highlighted by the Louvre, which is the great French museum, and people visiting Paris tend to go to the Louvre. This is a piece that stands 8 feet tall without its head. We're going to talk about that in a minute. It is very Hellenistic in terms of the way in which the figure interacts with our space, and also the way in which it has been designed in an incredibly theatrical way. This is the instant that the goddess of victory, and that's Nike, lands on the prow of a ship to bring victory to the Greek side in a naval battle. So we're still feeling a little superior here because we're winning again. And yes, the name Nike is the source for the shoes that are so popular today with the logo Just Do It. She then brings victory and is in the process of just landing, and her wings, as our textbook says, are in fact still beating. This would have been incredibly convincing, very lifelike, very dramatic, because as she lands on the prow of a ship, there is a water fountain underneath, so that there was literally water splashing on this statue. If you were seeing this back in the day then, you would have seen the water hitting the Nike. You also would have heard the sound of the water, making this look convincing, naturalistic, but also highly dramatic, as if it is a specific event unfurling in time in front of you. These are side views of our Nike that give you a little bit of a sense of the diagonal that runs through the figure, so that we feel that the wind is sweeping the body of Nike. The wings almost seem to be breaking, to be flapping in order to stop her from lunging forward. At the same time, however, she's a very graceful figure. This is also an incredibly naturalistic figure, so the Greeks continue striving for naturalism as they go throughout their history in the world of art. One of the things that's revealing about this, in fact, is the way in which the artist has carved what I'm going to call wet drapery. Let me go back for 1 second because I think it shows up better here. If you look at the tummy of Nike, it was carved to portray the fact that she's landing in the water and the water is spraying on her garments. The garments get wet, and what we have is a little wet t-shirt action as the garment that the Nike is dressed in clings to her body, and we can actually see the belly button coming through this. This then is an extraordinary example of Greek carving showing action, movement, and a moment in time. It's also very much a goddess coming down to our own level. This is the way that the French have displayed this in the Louvre, which is the reason that I am absolutely certain that when you go to the Louvre you will see this. It's at the top of a staircase. It's very dramatic, and it is very imposing. The Nike also is placed on top of the remains of this below, which is literally the prow of a ship. So we're talking about a very dramatic, a very theatrical piece that was designed with full-blown stagecraft in mind. The winged victory did indeed once upon a time have a head and arms, We have other Nikes that do, so we're quite certain that this one did. Today, however, we're kind of used to the Nike as she appears, and perhaps we might even prefer her without her head and arms.